Okay, so this is Roman numeral 5, but it is technically chapter 6 in your book. So this will coincide with chapter 6 starting on page 80. If you did want to kind of follow along, you can. But what we're talking about is economic systems throughout, like, not the world history, I guess, but more or less kind of economic systems that would exist today, and economic systems that have existed in the past that were somewhat popular. So, in the early economic systems, particularly ones that were affected by us, the first one is mercantilism. You AP history nerds should know what this term means, and normally I would call you out if we were in class. I'd say, Wyatt, Walker, Jonah, Seth, please tell me what this is. And Jonah might be able to tell us. Walker would kind of go, yeah, I don't remember. And Wyatt might be like, I think. And Seth would be drawing. So, mercantilism is this: it is a large country decides and tries to increase their goods for the homeland by setting up colonies worldwide. Now, the best example of this is really dealing with England and America. In the late 1600s, when England started sending people over here to explore and then colonize, they realized that America had a ton of natural resources that England didn't have. And so they tried to increase the amount of goods that globally for their homeland by setting up colonies worldwide. So what they did is they had a colony in America. This is why, like, if you go down to South Africa, the people have a very English accent because they set up colonies down there. They set up colonies in South America. They set up colonies near like India. And so what they were doing is they were using these smaller countries to get their raw materials, their raw goods. They would send those raw goods back to the homeland, England, and then they would, in these factories, create these large products. And they would push them out because they had a great navy and they had a great shipping system that would send it worldwide, and they would make a lot of money. And this was kind of one of the early economic systems. And this pretty much happened from, I would say, I guess you probably want to go further back, like 1500 to about late 1700s ish. And they would find all sorts of stuff, and they would trade things for gold and for silver, and in some cases they would find gold and silver. And so that was kind of what they were trying to do, and they were kind of balancing their trade out by having their people go out, discover stuff, bring it back. Hey, we found coal, we found iron, we found gold or silver, spices, and then they would bring it back to England, and then England would put an English label on it and sell it to the world and make a lot of money. And so that was kind of the idea. The homeland, the motherland, the England itself would be making all of these taking the raw materials from these colonies and making large products. The second idea that they kind of came up with was a French term called laissez-faire. You guys have probably heard this. And laissez-faire kind of took over in the mid 1700s. And then around the late 1700s, a guy by the name of Adam Smith writes a book that has a very lengthy title, but we just call it The Wealth of Nations. The full title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, also known as The Wealth of Nations. And so basically, through here's what he felt: that individuals should seek their own economic destiny without government control. Meaning, the government shouldn't tell you that you have to be a coal miner or an iron worker. The government shouldn't tell you that you have to be a homemaker, that you have to work with steel, or you have to work in the auto industry. The government shouldn't be telling you what to do. And so the term laissez faire is kind of translated from the French, and it basically means to leave alone or to I think one of the words is hands off that they use. And he basically argued that, like, back in this time, a monarch basically made people his subjects and made them do what he wanted them to do. And Smith didn't agree with that, and he said that people should be able to decide um, their own economic destiny. And so that would be kind of one of the things that he's focused on when he thinks he's trying to argue for. Um, and one of the statements here, I like this. Smith argued that the wealth of nations, that on the contrary, being left to their own devices, unconstrained by laws preventing theft and fraud, people will actively seek out needs of others in order to profitably satisfy them. A system far more satisfactory, he believed, than mercantilism. So basically, he's figuring that eventually people would seek their own economic destiny, and then they would also help other people. Well, we know that man is depraved and wouldn't necessarily do that, and so people become very selfish. So we in America tend to look at this and say we kind of want a mix of things. We like the idea of setting up colonies and making money and going global with our business, but at the same time, we don't want the government to tell us what we want to do. So America's kind of adopted the laissez-faire mentality. Letter B, modern economic systems. And this is going to kind of go into the stuff that you guys are used to. Generally today there are two sides of the argument, capitalism versus socialism. And you kind of determine, who wants or who's better, who's right, that type of thing. But within capitalism and within socialism, there are different forms of this that are done. And so, what we're going to do is first talk about capitalism, mainly because it's more familiar with us. America is kind of bent on a capitalistic mindset. The economy is bent on a capitalistic mindset, but it's not true capitalism. See, true capitalism is called radical capitalism, and I'll give you a graph on this once we get done, kind of showing you the extremes here. But radical capitalism, this is where private citizens own everything, meaning they own farms, they own businesses, they own land, they own every little thing, manufacturing, private citizens, and they make all of their own decisions. There's no government involvement, and this is kind of a little bit of what Adam Smith was arguing for in The Wealth of Nations. But what problem do you see with private citizens owning everything and making all of the economic decisions for the country? Well, what can happen is it can simply go to a point where you eventually get where people start stepping on each other, and there's no ramifications for you stepping on another person to ruin their business and to get your business to do better. And so when there's no government involvement, when there's really no rules, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. People just, shooting from the hip, 6 shooters, taking out other people's business. And so government doesn't get involved. And when you think about government getting involved, we're talking about law. You're talking about them saying, hey, there are certain laws of monopolies, there are certain laws of you not destroying another person's business. But in radical capitalism, it doesn't really exist in that way. They kind of just let people do their own thing. And so all of the decisions regarding about what will be produced, how it will be produced, and who will receive production is based on the citizens themselves. And the market is free, it can do kind of what it wants. And so it really doesn't seem to have many rules at all. And so it's very dangerous. Classic liberal capitalism, this is where the government must exist, but the government would exist at a minimum. And it would allow minimal ownership of some of the resource, or that the government owns minimal resources. It does have some decision-making power to perform certain responsibilities, but let me tell you what the government under classic liberal capitalism is expected to do. The government is expected to protect its citizens from foreign aggression on the economy, meaning, not allowing China to come into our country and take over all of our goods, or flood our market with all of their goods because it's cheaper. And the government protects citizens from foreign aggression on the economy. They just say, hey, we're going to make sure that you are protected and no foreign aggression would actually take place. The second thing would the government would provide public goods for people. Now, as far as like public goods for the people, what would those be? Basically, those would be something like highways, national parks. It could be money that they would kind of help set up, stuff that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do for ourselves. Um, don't necessarily think of like welfare here, but I guess it could fall under this. But they provide public goods for people, sewer, sewage, that type of stuff that they provide. Well, I guess they don't provide sewage; they would take it away. I don't know if any of you guys really want sewage; it'd be kind of gross. But anyway, it provides public goods for the people. And then the other thing, number three. Let's switch the slides here. Hang on, kind of slowing down a little bit. My computer's still dying in case some of you guys are still wondering here. So here we go. And number three, the government protects rights of citizens from other citizens. And so what this does is this kind of sees what radical capitalism was doing and says, you know what we probably need to do? We probably need to make sure that the workers are protected from other workers. And the workers are protected against other individuals. So this would allow you to have like a court system where you could sue somebody for destroying your business. You could sue people for, monopolies, that type of thing. And so the government protects the rights of citizens from other citizens if needed. And then lastly, state capitalism. This is where the majority of labor, capital, and resources are owned by citizens, but the government intervenes to ensure equal goals are carried out. Now, this probably, if you break this down, sounds a little bit closer to the U.S. Because when you think about it, majority of labor, meaning like you hiring people, capital, meaning like investments, and resources are owned by private citizens. And so, like McDonald's was owned by private citizens, but now obviously it's like a corporation, but still people own it. And you have businesses that hire people, and you have businesses that invest in other businesses. And they're owned by citizens, but the government intervenes to make sure equal goals are carried out. And basically, think of it like this: Americans are free to own houses and factories, and kind of make the decisions on where to build stuff. And we just have to go back to the three questions that we asked ourselves last chapter: what can be built, who's going to build it, and who gets the goods. That is what we're talking about here. And so the citizens decide that, but the government steps in to make sure that there are not monopolies, to make sure that the workers are paid at a protected wage, that they do not have to work overtime without getting paid, that they maybe perhaps get health benefits, that their safety on the workplace, on the work job. They would all kind of deal with that. Then you also have kind of under an extreme state capitalism, you would have where the government would actually step in and really, even though private citizens help, they would step in and make sure that you are protected almost your entire life. They call that the welfare state. We won't really focus too much on that. But if you had to pick which one America is, we would line up closer to state capitalism than we would line up to the other ones. It would be kind of closer to what we are used to. It's closer. It's definitely, we're way far away from radical capitalism. And in some cases, we do have classical liberal, but state capitalism is more closely tied to what America is today. All right, we'll stop at socialism here, and we will pick that up later on.